Hi, everyone.
Hello, Luke, and welcome. My name is Adrian. I will be hosting the Q&A session. Thanks for your presentation. The way we're gonna do it is we're inviting the viewers to ask any questions that might have using the chat. But in the meantime, I will also have some questions for you based on the information that you shared with us. And one of the things that I wanted to discuss is obviously Tech Sylvania is a conference in Romania. In general, Eastern Europe is a great market for very talented engineers. And with a cost of living that kind of matches a lot of the elements that you were describing. However, compared to where most tech companies are located, which is North America, there's an obvious time zone difference. And extrapolating that, obviously, that there's extensive engineering resources in India, there's extensive engineering resources in China, and you were highlighting a lot the importance of people being on the same time zone. How would you look at that in the context of a global engineering team? Is this worth it? Is it not? When it might be worth it?
No, that's a great question, Adrian, and thanks so much. When is it worth it, and when is it not worth it? I think the key component of time zone alignment is making sure that the business side, or the kind of customer centricity of building a tech product, that voice is heard, and there's somebody that's holding that perspective or coming from that viewpoint, engaging with the development team or the product team. A company that I talked to who had done this well, I think, with a group that was 4 hours time zone separation, so not as significant necessarily as Romania, but certainly different. And what they did was have the product manager, who was maybe a little bit more business oriented, who sat in the United States, work the same hours as the engineering team. And so I think there are situations like that where if each side gives a little bit, the really important aspect is that both the product and the business side, the technical product and the product from the business side, are able to engage in that sort of collaborative environment on the same time. And it also just requires people, I think, to be more responsive, to recognize that there's no 9 to 5, and as with most startups, there aren't, as I think most of us here know. But just recognizing that there's times, you'll have to work late at night or early in the morning, and being able to allocate some of your free time accordingly.
And you were mentioning in your presentation the differences between preferences when it comes to work environment between Canadians and Mexicans. But then again, it might look different, but it's still quite an heterogeneous group, because there are a lot of similarities between the USA and Canada, and to some extent Mexico, probably even like in general Brazil as a big market in South America as well. But if you look at global differences in culture, and especially when it comes to communicating in the digital environment. There are so many stories in companies where people working with colleagues in India or in China, or even like between Europe and the US, understanding the chain of command, understanding, is it appropriate to ask questions? Is it appropriate to push back? And all these things get lost in translation in remote teams that are also having the struggle of the cultural differences. How do you see this problem? How to tackle this? What are your advices here?
Yeah, and just the way that you frame the question is interesting, because I think if you talk to some Canadians, they may have a reaction to saying that their culture is similar to Americans.
No, I mean, in the sense that if you look at an engineer in China, I'm assuming culturally there would be more commonalities between an engineer in Canada and in the US compared to someone in China, in India, or in Ukraine, for example.
Oh, absolutely. And my only point in bringing that up was to illustrate, it is all somewhat relative.
Yes.
The important aspect, I think, is you can go deeply into how to evaluate different cultural nuances and everything else. The reality is that you have to have a translator. You have to have somebody that will be able to act as a go-between between U.S. and Romanian developers, or between Brazilian and Chinese folks. So that interpreter is really key. And I think that person can come from either side, but having familiarity with the work environment, the culture, the attitude is really critical to be able to translate between those groups. The other thing that's a little bit more scalable, if you're unable to find an individual who can really act as that, and some founders have been pretty public about this. I think actually the folks over at GitLab are really good about this. I think there is, I think somebody at Shopify created a working with me almost document. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but it's the idea is that a person goes through and says, this is how I communicate. If I'm blunt or ask you upfront questions, this is what I'm really trying to do. These are the things that I prefer. This is basically a user guide for interacting with me. And I think while that may be difficult to construct and build, if you are working across international borders, across cultures, across languages, that can be a huge tool to use in helping people understand. I want you to question me. When I say something, oftentimes it's to get a response from you, a reaction from you, so that I can understand where your perspective comes in. So I think those are two potential ways that you can help bridge that cultural gap.
And when you were referring to the translator, were you referring to also like a specific position in mind? So such as like, the team lead, the engineering lead, or could it be like the project manager? Could it be like the product manager? Have you seen any best case or best practices?
I think it's easiest when it's somebody with enough authority and is in the direct chain of command, as you mentioned earlier. But I don't think it has to be. I think it should, it gets easier when it's somebody with some positional authority, with some respect and kind of trust in their reputation on both sides. But I also, I don't know that it has to be. We've seen cases, they're more rare, but we've seen cases where it's just a senior member of the team that has, in the example of some of our Mexican teams, the senior, one of the senior ICs on the team had worked with US companies significantly before, said, hey, guys, I understand how this works. Let's talk through this, and was able to be a touch point for the rest of the team to understand, when the product manager says this, here's how to kind of translate that into our culture or what we would expect to hear.
And last question, you were referring to the community and support part, and I think out of all of them, that was probably the least obvious one. If you could share a bit more details with us, and also from the perspective of the cost, and not just the physical cost, but like the emotional, psychological cost of people moving as an expat to another country, or leaving friends and family behind to take a new position, because that has a cost on the productivity and the general psychological comfort of the person doing the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to maybe put your question in a different way, I think, in the not too distant past, you had to make a decision. Do I uproot my family? Do I go to a new place for a job where I feel comfortable and I can have daily in-person engagements with other people to understand the job better? Now we're in a position where it's harder to travel. It's harder to do that, but I feel less comfortable about the work environment I'm in. I'm not as comfortable with understanding how communication happens and being able to translate some of those cultural nuances. And so I think it's almost the two different sides of the same coin, where if as a business, if you think about the money, the resources, the time, the emotional energy that you put into welcoming somebody that had just moved in and was a new member of the company, you want to welcome them in the same way, but do it in a remote fashion. And how is that possible? Well, you can set up, services to bring snacks to their house, or you can give them a stipend, which we've seen a lot of companies do, to make sure that they outfit their home office. So you have a good monitor, and you have a chair, or you have a standing desk, whatever the case might be. And then it's a very deliberate sequence, and we have this actually very cataloged out, where every so many days there's a check-in, and there's some questions that we go over, and really creating the space so that more than just the job, you understand the culture, you understand the expectations, and you're welcomed into that new environment.
And for people that would want to kind of learn more or get more inspiration on this, could you recommend some additional resources, blogs, websites, books that inspired you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a number of resources and content out at the terminal site. We just launched a how to work remote guide that is, I think is really, really high quality, and we've been working on it for a while. GitLab is a fantastic group that has done a lot with remote working. And then Automatic published a kind of user manual for their adventures in working fully remote, and I think that's a great reference source for how to make it work.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up here, even though we also had some questions in the chat. But according to the schedule, in like less than 2-3 minutes, we should start the next Q&A session. It might be that the main stage will be going a bit over time, but I can't check both at the same time. Thanks so much, Luke, for your time. Thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Absolutely, Adrian. Thank you for your time. It's great to talk to you. And Maria, I see your question here. I'll just make sure to answer that directly with you. And
yes,
anyone
please.
else, please ping me on the messages, and I'd love to connect. Thanks
you all
so
much. Bye, everyone.
Cheers.